somebody.
Here comes Andy.
Very developed too, so.
That's crazy. You know, the stupid towers now, just.
Okay,
Cell tower with the lampshade.
let's go get started. Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order our December meeting for the Planning Commission for Kiowa Island. And if you'll take a roll call, please, Ms. Reynolds.
Mr. Daddy.
Here.
Mr. Badnett.
Here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Mr. Conley. Dr. Curran.
Here.
Ms. Hennessy.
Here.
Mr. Iwan.
Here.
Okay, thank you. First part of our agenda is the approval of the November minutes. Do I have a motion for approval
So moved.
and a second?
Second.
Okay. Any questions, comments regarding that November minutes?
I think I asked.
For the gold star.
Okay, with none, all those in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, good.
That both Waste Means, Town Council, and Planning Commission.
Don't jinx it.
it.
Gee, I wonder who provided them.
And we're and we're moving right along. Okay, any public comments on any of our agenda items today? Okay, you'll get another chance later, but thank you for being here. Okay, old business. Mr. Taylor.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Old business, our first update, or only update, whether it's Kiowa Next. I know this has been a well-anticipated time between our last time talking about Kiowa Next, our comprehensive plan update. We are inches away from providing you that. We got some new photos taken to drop in some of those placeholders of photos. That'll be shared with you this week. The next follow-up will be our actual scheduled drop-in, and that was a discussion at our last Planning Commission meeting where we wanted to invite the public to at least have an opportunity to review the document and provide some comments. We will share that with you before we publicize that document, but we are tentatively scheduled for December 17th as a drop-in for the community to understand, review the goals and objectives, ask questions of staff regarding the particular plan. And then from there, they'll also be able to provide any public comments directly to us. That puts us in a trajectory schedule for providing you guys to formally sort of review that in January. So we will have that scheduled for you as a sort of formally as a group body to make that before the community after, and we'll take those comments that we've shared from the community, provide that to you as well as part of that January meeting. So that's the update for Kiowa Next, but we're inches away to getting that document back to you. I see one hand question.
So are we gonna have the document before the community drop-in?
Yes, okay.
John, have there been any changes made since the last, I guess it was a workshop, not a meeting, but any other changes besides editorial stuff that you're making?
Just the things that you provided at that meeting, no other changes. We are, like I said, the other changes regarding some of the photos to make sure they align to the different element sections. That's the principal difference. But
No
none of
changes in the goals and the steps?
The changes that were provided at our last workshop are the only change that have been made. Yeah.
So what is your tentative plan for when we would get the document?
Supposed to be yesterday. I'm gonna just say it before Friday. Before Friday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Which Friday?
Not January.
Friday
Hard
the
copy, or we're gonna
16th.
pick it up?
If you would like a hard copy, as we have been providing, we can provide that hard copy for you, which I think you guys have appreciated. So we'll provide a hard copy for you.
Because they'll never print out on
Okay.
page
No,
two.
the formatting has looked a little bit different, meaning like it's not the long books, but it'll be easier to flip through. So that's part of another sort of organization format to that as well. Any other questions? All right, thanks.
Okay, John, thanks for the update. And why don't you keep the podium for new business next on our agenda?
I'll actually be passing the podium to Patria, who will come and present our new business proposed text amendment, which is our phase 2 element of tree preservation and landscaping standards.
Good.
Week before Christmas.
Hello.
Hello.
So I'm going to give just a little background into the process that we've gone through to get here. We have been working on this. As John mentioned, this is phase 2 of the tree preservation ordinance. And we followed a similar process that was followed during that first phase with the tree preservation. We have followed a similar view of having a stakeholder work group. So we've been working with the landscape work group since June and have just tried to build onto that ordinance. Similar purposes, one of the things is to provide a minimum landscape standard that reinforces and enhances Kiowa's natural environment and supports resiliency in the plant environment. And also to outline kind of proper care of shrubs and landscape plants. So again, to that process, the landscape and tree preservation ordinance was passed in April of this year. Excuse me. There was a community open house after that was passed. And then the first meeting of the Landscape and Tree Preservation Board that was established by that ordinance occurred on June. There are a few of those board members here. The Landscape Standards Work Group, and it started in June and met monthly to develop the standards that are before you. That work group was composed of members of the Planning Commission, Ron and Larry. The Landscape and Tree Preservation Board was invited to all of them, and most of them attended a few of those meetings and were copied in our notes. The ARB representative, the Kiko representative, the resort had a representative, and there was a professional landscape architect that currently does work on the island that was part of that work group. So we developed the standards that were then put before the Landscape and Tree Preservation Board meeting in November. They passed those or made a recommendation to you guys to recommend approval of those standards on November 19th unanimously. And then we're here now at the Planning Commission, and it will follow the similar way of the other ordinances of after you guys have reviewed it and make a recommendation, it will go to Town Council for 2 readings and a public hearing. So some of the factors that we considered during the process of developing the landscape standards was looking at the designing with nature, existing standards and guidelines, the development and reinforcement of the Grow Native program that has been reinforced in the database. Kiowa Next, the comprehensive plan, thinking about how the island may redevelop and parts of it redevelop and how the standards would be applicable there. And then the capacity building for enforcement, how you would enforce those standards. So I'm briefly going to go over them, and then if we have specific questions, we can get into the wording, the way that it's put together. So the applicability is similar or exactly the same as the tree preservation portion of the ordinance in that it applies to all property within the municipality with the exception of the single family. It is meant to address new construction, exterior remodeling, parking areas and other impervious surfaces, change of use if it's going to a more intensive use, and the addition of any structure, as well as at the request of the planning director. So landscape plan requirements are outlined. Specifically, it is required that a landscape architect registered in the state of South Carolina prepare and sign and seal the plans. It includes minimum information of what needs to be included in those plans to be able to review and make sure that they are meeting the minimum standards. So the mechanism for enforcement was the idea of issuance of a certificate of occupancy. So the process would be the plans would come in at the plan review, and then as the project was completed, the landscape architect of record would submit a letter certifying that those plans had been followed in the installation of the landscape. And then it would be tied to the issuance of the certificate of occupancy. We included a provision that if necessary due to timing or seasonal issues, that a temporary certificate of occupancy could be issued. Oops. So there are standards in terms of the installation, maintenance, and replacement, tying it to what are national standards and current professional standards, the American Association of Nurserymen standards. There is also a requirement for automatic irrigation system, and that the required trees and shrubs be maintained in accordance with these national standards. So plant materials. So there, we had some discussion in our work group about this, about what would be the right kind of criteria for this. And we developed a proposal that 70% of the shrubs and trees be native material, native to the island of Kiowa, and 50% of the ground cover be native. So it would also mean removal of any plant material listed on the invasive plant pest species of South Carolina list. And then no, to prevent monoculture, no single species could meet more than 40% of the total. There are minimum sizes included per each kind of category. Canopy tree is a 3-inch caliper, 12-foot height minimum. Understory ornamental tree and evergreen conifer tree, these are minimum sizes, would be 8-foot height. And then 50% of the shrubs would need to be 7-gallon and 50% 3-gallon. The minimum lot landscape requirements is the same as what you find in the tree preservation standard, looking at developing a standard for mitigation. So it's a minimum of trees shall be equal to the combined DBH greater than or equal to 20 trees per acre or 160 inches per acre, whichever is greater. And that's kind of a minimum if you have a pretty cleared lot, so you don't have a lot of trees on the lot. And then if there are trees on the lot, each lot after development must contain a minimum of 70% of the healthy trees that existed on the lot pre-development. The standards also suggest to minimize turf grasses and mulch areas, keep mulch areas no greater than 10% of the planting areas. That means just mulch, no other plant material. We have relocated the planting requirements for parking to this section so that when a professional, a design professional or a homeowner is looking at this, they will be able to see those landscape standards for both the parking lot and the compatibility buffers. So those have just been relocated from the existing code sections that they were in. And then grow native Kiowa Island. We want to reinforce this is an existing database. We are currently working with a subgroup of our landscape work group to look at strategies for implementation of this ordinance. So we're looking at expanding the grow native data that is available and also looking at developing a series of podcasts of professionals that are currently working on the island, and how to take care of natives, how to recognize natives. So that's kind of the synopsis. If there's specific questions to
Pietro, I have a few questions. Page 3 of the slide, what is the purpose? There's a phrase that's been used a number of times throughout different ordinances and different presentations. All properties within the town of Kiowa's municipal boundaries. Could you define that, please?
would be all the parcels, all properties that are in the boundaries. And I'm not quite sure how to further define it.
Well, there are properties in there which are excluded from the draft, i.e. single-family homes.
Right.
Others that are not, for whatever reason. What's the difference between all municipal properties and some?
Well, I think we followed the standards that were set in the tree preservation
No,
phase
no, no,
one
no.
of this.
This is, take off what was on the board before. This is the current presentation. You had the advisory board, you had the new tree advisory board advise you. The purpose stayed the same.
And we felt that currently there are minimum standards that are being followed for single-family properties administered by the ARB. And so that was part of why the focus on properties other than the single-family.
Okay. What's the difference between a single family with respect to that and a multiple family?
Again, I think that part of is not that we're excluding single-family, we're excluding single-family at this time, with the plan that sometime in the future, after this has been implemented and we have become more comfortable with it, that single-family would be included.
And we're also adding that, looking to add that amendment that I think John wrote to cover single-family that might not be covered by any ARB.
Yeah, I think that was going to probably come up as you guys
yeah.
made a motion and moved
But I mean,
forward.
in response to what Andy's asking, we aren't really discriminating other than we're focusing right now on multifamily and I guess other potential buildings, but excluding.
As well as the resort.
Yeah,
And I'm-
not with the plan that they'll be excluded forever.
And which is why we included people from the resort as well as Kika. And actually Doug, who works for Kika, was part of helping us come to that 70%, 30%, because he feels like they're following that now currently as they're moving forward with new plantings with Kika.
Okay, would you go to slide 6, please?
Yeah.
I see where you're exempt for the initial phase, but I understand that based on the last meeting and the minutes, we discussed parking and loading regulations, and as noted in the minutes, no action was taken. Yesterday, the town council spent an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out what meant, I'll let our council member explain it better, but they spent an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out what they wanted to do. With a draft, they were voting on to seek approval and begin to enforce without a recommendation from the Planning Commission. Now, aside from the procedural issue, the question was, and a comment was made that it could go forward, an application could go forward, even though the ARB hadn't signed off yet, and that it could not go forward without the town requirements being signed off with respect to parking and loading. What separates the fact that the ARB requirement applies to single-family homes, it applies to other properties on Kiowa behind the gate that are supervised and controlled by the covenants. Yet you have a discussion that basically takes it away from the ARB or requires a dual requirement separation, approval for items going to both single family and multiple family. Why are we there?
In less than 10 words.
Based on the discussions that we had internally with our landscape work group, I believe there was a desire to codify the landscape, a minimum landscape standard for the properties that are not single-family.
So the town council approved an ordinance yesterday with word changes that are going to be decided by staff after they couldn't figure out what they wanted. They asked the staff to figure it out. Yet there's, again, no recommendation from this board, which is required by law. So I don't know what the purpose of asking for something, not getting it, and going ahead without it. And again, is that going to happen here?
I think the purpose of this, Andy, is to give us a framework so we can have a sense of consistency within the island and at least make a first step on doing so. Will there need to be changes made later after we learn from what we've done? Probably. And if that's the case, it would come to the Planning Commission first, I believe, and then we would make such changes as recommended and with John's support. Am I correct on that, John?
Yeah,
Well, they're worried about, just to comment on that, they're worried about a round circle, getting it back after it's required to be resubmitted to the Planning Commission. If we disagreed with their, quote, changes, it would go back to them again, and they would have to make changes, or not, or agree with us, or not.
So I just want to, I'll jump in here just to, I was going to give the updates about yesterday's town council meeting towards the end of the meeting, but I think I'll just provide updates on the pervious paving requirement ordinance that town council heard for consideration of second reading. Upon that particular ordinance, the ordinance has not been passed yet, so it's not in effect. What town council did on yesterday's meeting is essentially suggested a few changes, and our legal counsel suggested, based on those changes, that we would bring those changes back to the Planning Commission for review and recommendation. And so we'll bring that ordinance back for you guys with some narrow scope of what you guys should provide some additional detail or commentary around. And then from that recommendation, we'll forward that ordinance on back to town council. And so that was just based on our advice from our legal staff to ensure that there wasn't any changes that were made substantively within the ordinance that had not seen Planning Commission recommendation. Regarding today's ordinance, the applicability of whether it's single family versus non-single family, that's been the intent since the original phase one of looking at the applicability of single family standards, because the Architectural Review Board has been in place for some time for Kiowa, and those protections of landscape standards and tree preservation has been administered by that entity. There was no need or desire to duplicate that effort or types of review services. The standards that are in place today are minimal standards, or being recommended rather, are minimal standards from a phase two landscaping standards. And this would be applied in that same fashion of looking at all properties that are not single family. Single family would be exempt as it's proposed written today. So I don't know, hopefully that clarifies a little bit about what town council shared yesterday in their deliberations of second reading on the pervious paving requirements.
John, there was no discussion of sending it back to the Planning Commission in the final conclusions. They changed the words, they told the council, but they agreed on the definition, if you will, of new and replacement, put some words in to deal with that, and then move forward without deciding on coverage or changes in what made a replacement versus a repair, and said, okay, let the staff deal with words, bring it back, we'll do it administratively. There was no change or no requirement for us to come back, even though council said so.
That's incorrect. So
Right, Andy.
that's,
You
Okay.
can check the minutes.
I was at the meeting yesterday, and it is coming back to us.
that's
Absolutely,
incorrect. So
positively.
Yeah, I see
The last
a
thing
town
that the mayor
councilman
said was we'll
shaking
do it
his head. Why don't
administratively.
we have Lance
Yeah.
tell us?
Mr. Cabelli, that the ordinance will be coming back before the planning commission. That's based on what town council discussed it yesterday. If you wanted to share it.
I mean, I'm just one of five, but what John and Jean are relaying is what we decided on. We made some recommended edits. It's coming back to the planning commission for review. We had a hard time at 5 o'clock in the afternoon coming up with wordsmithing, some definitions. We asked the planning staff and the attorney to work on that and come up with proposed wording, but that is coming back.
Fair enough. Any other questions? All right, let's move right along. We are now, I think, to vote on this
You need a motion.
amendment. Do we have a motion?
Can I just ask, does
Absolutely.
the motion include this proposed language?
Yeah, but don't we make the motion on this first, and then you make a motion to amend it?
Okay, I just wanted to be clear on the procedure. All right, I make a motion that we
14 years, I learned something.
approve the,
Okay, we got a motion. We have a second.
For me.
Second.
Okay.
Now we have discussion.
Now
discussion.
discussion on,
yeah, I
Your-
would like to make a motion that we amend to include the language that John has written. The provisions of this article apply to all real property within the municipal limits of the town of Kiowa Island, excluding single-family residential developments. However, the provisions of this article shall still apply to single-family residential developments which are not subject to review or purview of any established architectural review board.
Joanne, where's this list?
Page three.
It's on page 3.
Page 3,
Of this packet, the packet that was,
okay, but not the exhibit, page 3.
not, go to the front of your.
Front of it, okay.
No, the very beginning where the agenda is. You're on the wrong part. The very beginning where the agenda is. Start at the beginning, page 3 from the very
Place it
beginning.
started usually.
So is this open for discussion?
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
yes.
So I have no trouble with the intent. I guess I wonder, is this potentially put us in any legal, if there's only one set of properties that are described by this, are we just discriminating against those properties?
Are we sure there's only one set?
I don't know, I'm asking a question. And also, it's, if there are more than one, that's better than if there is just one.
So you say discriminate, but it's targeting, right? Is that the,
Yeah,
targeting
targeting.
is the issue?
Correct.
So are there more than properties that have been discussed?
No, so the properties I think that you all are inquiring or discussion are the properties which are not subject to architectural review board standards, which would be most of the properties on Eugenia Avenue. Those particular properties which are not subject to the ARB, they do have the option to opt in for the service to have review or purview under that entity. That is something separately from the town's purview. This ordinance would be applicable to any of those properties. And so it's not singling out one particular property by name or location. It's just singling out, I'm not using the word singling out, it's providing coverage to those properties which do not have architectural review standards. So we
Could you
did,
define those properties? Which ones?
there are,
Talking about alterations, A or B? You're
sorry?
talking about commercial, A or B? What are you talking about?
properties which are not covered by the architectural review.
Which
board.
are?
There
Define
are,
them.
there are single-family lots.
Firehouse?
No, those are subject to architectural review board standards.
What's not?
There are properties listed on Eugenia Avenue which are not subject to architecture. Eugenia Avenue.
Yes.
That aren't part of the town?
They are part
They are
of the
part of the
town, they're
town.
not part of
KICA.
KICA. They're not
Fine.
part
Yes,
of
some of
KICA.
it is, some of it isn't.
In your packet, I
With three, okay, go ahead.
in your packet, I included or at least in the, a quick sort of synopsis of those Eugenia properties just for additional context.
So hypothetically, if we would annex something that was not on the island, this would apply.
Yes.
Correct.
point.
That would be the
So
second,
that's- so
that's
that's
the
would
second
seem to me that it's a
consideration.
What do you mean, not on the island?
General, I see it as a general thing.
Exactly.
That we want every property within the boundaries of the town of Keel Island to be subject, one way or the other, to some standards of landscape, whether
was the
it's
other-
done by the town or the ARB. We want to make sure every property within our boundaries is covered. And I think that's the intent of
I think
this.
that's the intent. I agree.
As long as, I mean, again, I understand, I'm not against it, but I certainly don't want to bring and create another legal battle. The people that own these properties along Eugenia, do they have a homeowners association? Do they have any, quasi-architectural review
They do not.
process?
No, sir.
They don't have an architect.
Well, there is a requirement, if they change hands or if they build on a vacant lot, they have to come into KICA.
I
There's
don't
no-
think
No,
so.
And be,
I don't
then be
think so.
required to
That's.
do all the standards.
That's incorrect.
No, that's
Not
not.
the case?
That's correct, Andy.
When do they come in?
They're not required. That property is not part of KICA. And they have voted or whatever, they don't want to be part of KICA. One of the reasons being, I think they don't want a road going through to the sandcastle. But regardless, they're not part of KICA and they're not required to be part of KICA.
Yeah, some are and some aren't. There's 76 lots, I believe, 76 lots at
On
Eugenia.
Eugenia Avenue.
Yeah.
Some of the,
Give or
And
I
some of
think-
them are exempt and some aren't.
Correct.
Some are grandfathered, so, okay.
So from a legal standpoint, we're okay with this?
Well, you say when legal,
Lawyer says it's okay.
It's fine with me.
all right.
Are there other,
So
are you
so you
process
motion,
of
so
your
you
amendment?
make the
So we
motion.
motion-
We need to have a motion now.
I made a
To
motion
go
on the
forward.
amendment.
I'll second it.
Yeah, I made we had the motion second on the
Second?
amendment.
Yes. Okay.
Now we had the discussion, we vote on the amendment.
Right.
Then we vote on the amended ordinance.
If there's no other discussion,
I have another
okay?
separate area. When it comes to applicability on page 12 of 19, we're talking about parking areas. It doesn't really specifically say whether these are new parking areas or all, new or all parking areas. Are we?
Just for administratively to help staff out, if we can take the vote on the First Amendment and then come back
Oh,
to
that's fine.
that.
Right.
That will.
Sure.
Okay. So we're going to vote on the amendment itself. It's already been a motion and a second. All those in favor of
Just repeat
approval?
the amendment, please.
It was that,
The amendment?
it's what's on page
Page
3,
3 of the amendment.
page 3 at the beginning.
Right here.
Not of the standard.
It's basically saying that this
Not in the slides.
article will cover single-family residentials which are not subject
Yeah, it's
to
not in
any
the standard.
RLD.
Yeah, it's page 3 of the actual amendment.
Where is this in the amendment? That's all I'm asking.
Well, it's not in,
In
we have a
112,
motion to
129.
add
This
this.
is
We have a
to amend the
motion to
amendment.
add it.
This is
To
to amend the
129.
amendment.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yes.
Right, where
It's
are you
an
going to put
emotion-
it?
Yes.
It would be applicability.
Applicability, okay. So that goes back to where your motion was.
No, I didn't make a motion.
John wants you to wait. All right, it's fine. That's where it belongs.
All right, we have the motion, we have the second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Approved. Thank you.
Dr. Kern, you can continue with your,
Yeah, I don't have an amendment, I have a question when it comes, again, to the applicability, which is on page 12, number 1, and we go down to A3, we talk about parking and other impervious surfaces. Is this new parking or all parking, all impervious?
It's new parking, and I believe there's a section in the code that says if you're amending things over a certain value, then you have to bring it up to current code. Is that correct, John? Right. Remember the section.
The non-conforming section, so if a property is being improved by a substantial amount, they would need to meet the current standards. So that's just referencing our non-conforming structures section in our code.
I didn't see that section.
So it's not,
in this
it's not part of this, but
It's
it's,
generally across the board for any
Was-
improvements.
It was part of yesterday's discussion, and in some respects, it struggled with the percentage that became a replacement or a repair, whether it was part of a larger piece of parking in a regime area or two pieces separated, and would it apply to each one, or that's what they're working on. They'll change that section in terms of what it is and what it will be.
I'll pose this question to help us give clarity on what direction or your comment. Is there concern of the element of parking areas that would need now a landscape plan based on this, or?
I just want it clarified, so as you read this, but, again, it's, if we want to start with just new parking areas, that's fine. I don't think this really specifies just new, so in some respects, you'd be talking about all parking lots.
That's a
Correct.
good question, because it is vague.
If you want to add a clarifier, we can do that part of if amendment, but that would be up to you guys. As part of your recommendation, you can make an amendment to add more clarity if that's helpful.
So it doesn't apply to existing parking areas, is that?
So if existing parking, if a property is being improved by a certain percentage, then it would need to meet that. But if you guys are, with the intent, same comment sort of shared with council yesterday, if you guys have the intent that doesn't matter that percentage, you want to add a qualifier in this ordinance as part of the actual code and not rely on a non-conforming section, then you could do that as well.
Well, in this, we've talked about, criteria for a major improvement involves a change in the footprint of the structure. So I think in this ordinance, when we were more involved with the tree section, we did specify what's a major improvement, what's a minor
Yeah,
improvement.
the practicality is that you won't see a lot of parking lot changes unless there's some change in the actual use. So I mean, adding in a qualifier here, I mean, it may not be that practical in application in real time, basically because most changes in parking designation would depend on any change to use.
But still, this is still just not, this still excludes single family, so it's still talking about multifamily.
Yeah, this would still be applicable to multifamily commercial properties. Yeah.
Yeah, and this may have been an area where they said, let the planning commission give us some help or give us some guideline, if you will, as to what percentages qualify or not. But they basically said, we're talking about replacement of a driveway as opposed to maintenance.
Right, so if you're looking for just I guess a little bit of recommendation from staff, it would be if there's substantial improvements, we would recommend that those new tree standards apply for that parking area, but if there's not, it would be, I think, minimal to require additional tree, if there aren't any substantial updates being provided to that. That's just kind of a clean way to think about it.
I mean, I guess the only thing I would say is maybe consider just making it new or significantly redeveloped parking areas or impervious surfaces.
That didn't fly yesterday. That didn't fly because they weren't specific.
Right,
wanted
well,
it-
this is
No, I know. They
absolutely not
wanted-
specific, so.
What they wanted was
this is-
a percentage amount or some way to measure what becomes mandatory for replacement as opposed to a repair of it.
So
Driveway.
can I pull back just a second to make sure I understood? You're on page 12, correct? The landscape
Yes.
standards applicability. The requirement under A, landscape plans, You're asking whether or not these should be modified in order for us to receive a landscape plan?
Well, I think it's, again, throughout the entire thing, we spend a lot of time on parking, and we put in some very specific criterias about landscaping for parking and such. I mean, again, I guess my question is this going to apply just to new parking areas, the new construction? Or are we at some point going to apply these standards to all parking areas?
I go back to my just previous comment. I mean, you won't see a whole lot of new parking lots being modified, existing parking lots being just modified just because. But if there are new construction, of course, yes, substantial renovation. So that would now require that this ordinance kicks in place because that parking would now need to respond to the use of the building and structure that you.
Where it reflects on 17.
I know.
You
John,
could,
what's the downside of putting in new parking areas, or other new impervious surfaces? Just put new in front of those two?
man, the pleasure is your recommendation. Yeah,
Okay,
so-
we can just leave it then.
I don't know. I don't know what they're, I'm not sure what we're trying to accomplish here. That's my problem.
Yeah, it's okay, we can just leave it as it is.
It's more on page 17, not 12. The discussion focused yesterday.
Are there amendments, suggestions, recommendations?
No. Okay.
If not, then we would take a motion on the as amended version.
I move that we approve the text changes of landscaping standards as amended.
Second.
All those in favor?
Further discussion.
We haven't already discussed it?
You have to ask for discussion after a motion.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Moving right along. John, would you give us a correspondence staff comments and updates, please?
Yes, sir, thank you.
This
I will
include this?
begin with just the two ordinances. Really, one, we kind of discussed one of those ordinances that were discussed at second reading for town council yesterday. So one of those, as you recall, you guys took action on non-conforming section. Town council did recommend approve on second reading. That is the ordinance that codified additional standards or considerations regarding the Timbers property and all properties that would be being able to build back. And so that was approved by town council. We just had somewhat of discussion regarding the other pervious paving requirements. As stated previously, that ordinance will be coming back before you guys for review and recommendation. Staff will provide some additional support language, working with our legal counsel to prepare that before you, and we'll have that ready for you guys for review. Just to note, we are considering potentially a special call meeting for that, just to help, I think, move the process along in that so that our January agenda doesn't get so much clouded between town council and planning commission. So we'll be asking your availability for a week or two to see if that's feasible. If not, we'll hold it for January. The other updates regarding our development projects, a brief update was given yesterday on the Beachwalker projects, the Ocean Pines, the West End. Town council has the two members of town council, Mr. Berner and Mr. Farrell, who've been working as a mediation team with the developer, have working on finalizing through the attorneys the final documents and exhibits that would be now processed through the courts. They are near, I think, in the goal line of getting that document back for review and consideration for the courts, and so anticipating of that being agreed upon and finalized through the formal process. We anticipate that to come in the very near future. The other development projects, many are aware that Seafields is rolling and rocking pretty swiftly. MUFC is already also moving in ground. The resort will be undertaking Mingo Point Dock. I think I gave that update maybe at our last meeting, that they'll begin that process. Those are substantial projects. We did include a couple pre-application meetings that we've had for resort consideration of Roy Barth tennis facility. And some time ago, we did have interest for a new restaurant building at Freshfields, but there's been no further traction on that particular facility. Looking sort of outside the town, Betsy Carrison Parkway, as you all know, the medical village that was proposed on Betsy Carrison Parkway, that is scheduled to go before Charleston County Council for public hearing on December 10th. And then December 19th, that will be the Public and Planning Works consideration for County Council. Prior to that, on December 9th, Town Council, jointly with the town of Seabrook, the mayor will be holding a drop-in community meeting to discuss that particular project. And I think County Councilwoman Honeycutt has been invited to that meeting as well. So we've been encouraging the community to participate and come out and share their concerns with that proposal project. Shifting gears to our comprehensive marsh management plan, it's somewhat continuing in a state where not aggressiveness, but excuse me, we'd have slowed down a little bit, I think, just because of the pervious paving. That was our last sort of big baby that has pushed out of that subcommittee or marsh management work group. There are 2 scheduled meetings, one with the subcommittee. Remind me, Patria, that's Friday? Thursday. That subcommittee meeting will begin to discuss buffers, pond edges, setbacks, bulkheads, erosion control devices. And so based on that discussion and the process of moving through the work group of the comprehensive marsh management plan, we don't anticipate anything that would come before you all for some time, but that will begin the work its process similarly as a recommendation came for the pervious pavement requirements out of that work group. And so we anticipate that to move through December, maybe early January, and then hopefully, potentially, maybe some early considerations by February. Regarding pervious surfaces, although the ordinance did not receive second reading on yesterday, we have still continued our efforts, as you guys have requested that we do, to continue to educate and make the community aware of the benefits of community of pervious surfaces. So we did push out communications directly to all contractors on the island, that we encourage them to talk to their clients to choose options of permeable surfaces. The town, community association, the ARB, Conservancy worked on a joint effort to prepare a exhibit that kind of highlights a lot of the benefits and considerations. We've shared now or updated our website with some additional language and additional just educational components that allow property owners to be aware of the benefits. And you all may have already seen the video that was produced a few weeks ago through our communications team and Neil specifically. So we're continuing this effort of trying to make it more aware of the benefits of pervious surfaces. The last thing that I'll do, then you want to come up and talk about yesterday's cell tower presentation that was shared with council. He'll hit some highlights, and that'll be the end of, I think, all of our staff updates.
John, you want to take questions before Vince gets up? The property we're talking about for town council, co-town council session with Seabrook, is the medical property, or is it the housing property alongside town hall?
The medical.
That's what I thought. But if you look at the last one of the alerts that went out, the weekly alert, it said the areas next to town hall or nearby town hall, didn't define it as the medical property.
Well, we'll
I'm
take
not
a
sure
look,
that
I'll
it's
take a
clear
look again,
enough.
but the intent was they discussed the medical village. Maybe there are some other components to just joint efforts
No,
between, but.
this
they-
was in the town's newsletter.
Yeah, the intent was to discuss specifically the proposed medical plan development that has gone now through the county.
It would be confusing to people reading it, that's all I'm saying.
It does have
I did
residential.
wonder that too, because it
That-
did,
that-
you're right,
that-
it did say housing next to the town
Yeah, it did,
hall.
yeah.
The plan development does have residential components to it, so I don't know if that was the intent
No, it
or
was-
something that.
They both, it was unclear where it was, let's put it that way.
I'll take a look at it.
The second question I have for you is as far as the comment you made on the restaurant, is that the one across, was the one across the way from the area that's permitted that is not going to be developed? Or is there a separate restaurant area that is being redeveloped?
No, this was, the site would be located today across from Fuji
Right.
Cantina, that property.
And there were two sites that we platted, I believe, across in front of Fuji.
Yeah, so that was
That would be one of them.
next to the entrance of the area that is now sort of on in front of the lagoon, that parcel that's to the right of that.
Okay. And there is one last point that I'll make, and that was on the rather large or lengthy discussion on the development agreement with the resort. And I don't know if you plan on mentioning anybody over here is going to report on that, but I would suggest, since our representative is not here, you're going to have to carry the water back. My suggestion would be very clearly to not embroil ourselves in another legal dispute over the development agreement to be changed, if it's updated, if it's amended, if it's going to be weighted or delayed or whatever. To that end, I think you've got a formula for working with the resort, working with the owner of the property, working with, and if we needed, the developer, I'd call him the company because I'm used to that word now, but the developer, that we would not be benefited by having the mayor involved in a conversation, similar to the same thing with the arbitration or the reconciliation process we went through just recently to get us out of the analysis. And I would suggest the same two council members or an addition or whatever be added to the process, but not the mayor, for the same reason. We don't need in this community another legal battle over somebody's view versus somebody else's view.
Okay. John, thanks for your update. Daniel, if you'll give us the highlights of that presentation yesterday regarding the cell towers. And I had no idea we had 7 on the island.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Staff was tasked with finding out more information about cell towers on the island and to figure out some potential issues that have been coming up in terms of cell coverage, dropped calls, and kind of how to get that infrastructure on the island. So myself and Mike Nardelli, we've been working with the current tower owners on the island, communicating with them back and forth on to getting an idea of kind of what's on the island now and what their issues are with upgrading their current towers. So if y'all tuned into yesterday's meeting, at the beginning there was a presentation first by staff of a video showing all the towers on the island, followed by American Tower, who owns the large tower over at Kestrel Court. And they gave a great presentation on the coverage issues on the island. So they showed some green dots where coverage was good and some red dots where coverage was bad. And they kind of sought out some spots that needed better coverage. They didn't give any formal recommendations on increasing tower height limits with our code. So myself, Mike, and Lance Spencer, our council member, we're going to talk with them further and see if some changes to the code are necessary, and if not, kind of what we can do to better help the coverage on the island. So I can show the video if y'all like, or if y'all just want to watch the replay, that's fine too. Up to you, Mr. Chair.
I'd make a comment that the video was excellent, and I think the whole presentation was. The only nit that I'd even suggest fell off the table was the comment that at one point somebody said, and we'll go into the reasons why that's the case for lesser coverage in certain areas. It never really occurred to get into a discussion about what the problem was, or if the problem was, other than, well, the towers have limits, heights, and we had different regulations, et cetera. But never once did it come up that there was a contract issue that precluded some adjustments or improvements in the service that was between TOKI and Comcast. And with Mr. Fernandez in the audience, who went through that exclusively and reported to the TOKI board, I would have expected, of all people, I would have expected him to say something. But that could be a part that you could add to your next presentation, because that, I think, is just as important as building a higher tower or adding pieces to it or adding a new tower. Whatever the resolution is, we got to deal with that too.
Got it.
Daniel, I got two questions. First of all, are we talking cell phones, or are we talking Wi-Fi?
Cell towers.
Cell towers,
So we're just talking cell phones. So so Comcast,
yes, it is affected according to the report that was given to Kika. There's a contract between the cell tower, between KICA and Comcast that precludes additions to the tower by other providers during the term of the contract.
so contractually, other providers can't.
Improve or upgrade their systems.
So then the second question I have is was the tone of the conversation or the tone of the presentation that this is a technical infrastructure technical problem, or is there a problem by certain carriers? It seemed to me it would indicate that certain.
Both. It's both. I mean, there's clearly a technical issue that's available, and we can get more specific and better advice from our town council representative, but the fact is there's both problems. One problem is providers aren't willing to come into areas where they're not going to get sufficient volume of business to upgrade and spend the money to upgrade their system. And that could be part of it through the contract. It also could be part because the towers aren't available in the areas they need them, or they're not big enough or whatever. So it could be both parts of the problem.
Did it end up with an action plan on how to, you guys look moving forward to take this information now and come up with some recommendations?
So yesterday was strictly informative information. We just wanted to get the conversation out there, get the community involved. Me and Lance and Mike are going to work together with these tower owners and kind of discuss next steps. Like I said, whether it be changing the code or, having a survey out there to the community, telling them, if they drop a call, where do you drop a call at? Because that's some information that helps those carriers kind of, decide whether or not to invest in infrastructure in certain areas. So
I think the bottom line, which people who watched the presentation yesterday learned, was if you live near the coastline or the far east end, you don't have the good coverage.
Right.
And the one thing that was educational for me is of the 7 towers, one tower is like T-Mobile and AT&T. That's it. The next tower could be Verizon and T-Mobile. The next tower could be AT&T and T-Mobile. But you don't have 7 towers with all of the carriers. Is that correct, Lance?
That's correct.
There are 3 towers of Verizon. I got a PowerPoint I can show up here.
Right.
Right.
And there's 2 other towers, there's the tower just north of here.
Right.
And the striking comment, I think, was the one you made, that you had to go to Seabrook to get coverage. The other thing and part of the presentation was the next step, one of the next steps would be to get the providers in.
Right.
That was
and make
mentioned,
sure
yes.
that we understand and they understand what the issues are.
Yeah.
That's kind of our goal, is to let them know that we have issues, and hopefully they'll invest more in.
Looking at the towers, I can tell why my Verizon doesn't work well.
Time to switch.
Pretty clear who you should
Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks.
And Lance, you are, I think, assigned to help work on that, I believe. Good. And with your AT&T background, you're the right person for that, so thank you. Public comments on anything you've heard or saw on our agenda today? Well, we thank you for,
Jen,
oh,
yes.
please. And thank all of you for coming today and giving us your afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Hayes. I'm the Landscape Board member for the Architectural Review Board, former staff member with the ARB since 2005, and was involved in the landscape work group. So in regards to the text amendment that you voted on today, I did want to clarify that from our perspective, the ARB perspective, the text amendment, instead of being additive and complementary to the existing landscape guidelines and standards, which the ARB enforces for all properties on Kiowa, instead of being additive and complementary, the text amendment is in fact a duplication of the ARB guidelines, adding to the length and the complication of review for owners. This is not only a missed opportunity to fill in some gaps, but it is the creation of opportunities for conflict between the 2 review agencies, with owners bearing the negative costs and being stuck in the middle of this duplicate review. So with that in mind, I would encourage you to pause and reconsider the text, paying particular attention to excluding those areas of the text that are a duplication of the standards and guidelines, and instead focusing on the amendment, for example, which was added regarding the Eugenia properties, which is one of those gap areas. Some other ideas that are gap areas would be an ordinance related to landscape maintenance of properties within the island, or the requirements regarding native plants. That's, that the 70 and 40% language that's in there, for example, does cover a gap that I think is additive to the island instead of a negative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Sure. So there is language in there about maintenance expectations.
Yes.
It doesn't really address how that would be policed and, at what point would there be action taken? Do you have any recommendations? Because that, obviously, maintenance is very important, and there is some general information in the text. Do you have anything more specific about how you could make that more practical? That's how we could police maintenance?
Well, I think it's less about policing and more about fleshing out that as a concept, because the ARB guidelines do reference maintenance in keeping with general landscape standards, nursery standards, which is what is in the ordinance. But going above and beyond that and clarifying that actually on Kiowa, we want you to do better than that. We want you to do better than just, pruning for crossing branches and fertilizing when a plant is deficient. I mean, those are the general standards. We want, you to do whatever, but I would think that the maintenance concept could be fleshed out to be more detail-oriented about natural pruning techniques and maintenance that is supplementary to the natural landscape that we're trying to promote on Kiowa, as opposed to a more manicured look. So, but I don't know what the answer is for what that language would be, but there's certainly a lot of opportunity for fleshing that out above and beyond what already exists.
We started with the fact that there are numerous older properties where the landscaping maintenance has not really kept up.
That's true, yes.
And, again, that was a very difficult topic, one that we all thought was worthy of pursuing, but difficult to approach.
It was, and I know in the, that's something to give more thought to, but that's not the only opportunity. We had also talked to the Conservancy and had hoped that they would have some ideas on language related to, best practices of native plant maintenance, which really is a different animal than non-native maintenance. And so there's some opportunities there just with maintaining existing plantings, where they exist.
So again, to the point is that right now, this is only applicable to not single homes. These are so most of these are gonna have a professional come in to do their planning. So I think my long way around is that when we do look at updating this for the single-family homes, that would be an opportunity to do some of the more fine-tuning that you're talking about?
Yes, but that is not my point.
Right.
My point is that ARB standards and guidelines already apply to multifamily and commercial properties, and, I would hold that they apply well to those. The sanctuary is an example, Cougar Point Clubhouse is an example, the conference center is an example. And so, I'm suggesting that the current text as it's written is a duplication of what already exists.
And we started with that, and Andy was one who was vocal, that we were given this task by council 2 years ago.
Right.
And it was clear that this task was a duplication, and there was never a great explanation of why we were duplicating the process. And Andy, as I said, was very vocal about that. And I don't think we've gotten any more of a clear explanation over the past 2 years. But again, this was our task.
Understood.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the comment, because I think when I asked the question earlier, are we going to do it again? That's exactly what I was trying to get to. But just to round out the entire picture, it may not even be a duplicate, it could be a triplicate, because we do have rules and regulations for KICA that apply to all properties behind the gate. And those regulations do have some maintenance issues or maintenance suggestions, some stronger than others, but in terms of your question about compliance, they're there. I mean, not only does the ARB have the standards, the rules and regulations provide the compliance. So again, I agree with you. We don't have a good explanation other than I want it to be the town.
Thanks, Andy. Wrapping up with commissioner comments, Gene, we'll start with you.
All good?
All good. That's good, Gene. Larry?
I just wanted, I'm not quite sure how this is, how this will play out, but I wanted to take opportunity in case, I don't want to miss the opportunity to thank Bill and Andy for their, I want to make 2 points here. First of all, the amount of work these guys have put in, excuse me? So they'll be here in January?
Yes.
So I can say this to January?
Exactly.
Then I have no problem.
Well, no, hey, you were going so well. I was looking for the gold watch.
You'll get it in January.
Any other comments that are true?
No comment.
Okay, Joanne. Dr. Kern.
Nothing to add.
Nothing new.
Andy, okay. Do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second? Second. We're adjourned.